Mr. Tabash will lead off with his 10-minute closing statement. Thank you, Mr. Tabash.
Well, this is the last opportunity I have to address you as a group, and I would say that notwithstanding Dr. Bahnsen's swipes at me, and I think that immortal line of being a criminal in the universe is a lot of fun, but notwithstanding that, I think that I don't have to demonstrate the impossible in order to be able to talk about the possible. Now, certainly the idea of the hydrogen and the carbon and the basic building blocks of life on this earth are much more plausible from what we can perceive than a putative mythological being, some equivalent of ancient societies' giant frog or giant crocodile god or whatever. I think that when you create a myth in order to fill in the gaps of what you don't know, that doesn't validate the argument. I don't have to know exactly how my typewriter was put together in order to know its limitations. I may not know exactly what piece went where first, but I do know that my typewriter will never be able to make coffee. That's the nature of the beast. So I may not know exactly which atoms came together first, and neither does Dr. Bahnsen, though he may pretend to by his attempt to seize upon divine knowledge through the Bible. But I do know that however it begun, and I think the Big Bang Theory is a scientific theory that is plausible and that doesn't depend on supernaturalism, but however the universe begun, I think that we do today know its qualities to a large degree. So I don't know how this microphone was put together exactly, but I know that it carries my voice more than it would if I were not speaking through it in a hall this size. So I know that the universe, in what it shows me, does not depend upon violations of its own laws. And I know that the universe is not so structured that there is an invisible being who periodically, but hasn't done so in 2,000 years, violates those laws in order to make a point. And I believe that that being, if it wanted me to believe in it, should have had the rabbis take me to the Santa Monica Beach in 1955 and part the Pacific Ocean the same as the Red Sea was allegedly parted. When I did this debate on this campus in March of this year, I began by saying that no one will believe me if I tell you that 2,000 years ago on this very site here in ancient Davis, that a spaceship from Mars visited this very site and set in motion a special machine which would determine that 2,000 years later a University of California would be built on this site and it would be renowned for its veterinary school. Now, none of you will believe me because there's no proof that such things happen. There is no proof that flying saucers landed in Davis 2,000 years ago because there's no proof that they land in Davis today. And there's no proof that the destiny of this university wasn't finalized 2,000 years ago because there is no proof that the present at any given moment can predict precisely what the future configuration will be. If you had proof that people 2,000 years ago could predict exactly what future universities would look like, you would then believe my claim, but you don't. And I can tell you, and I think that I'm being a little bit more magnanimous than my opponent, that I would never, even though I'm convinced of what happened 2,000 years ago on this sacred spot, I would never tell any of you that you're going to go to hell forever because you don't believe in what happened, even though I believe that, in fact, the flying saucer came and the prediction came true. Because verifiability is something that we justifiably can look to in whether or not to believe the supernatural. And self-authenticating accounts in books written a long time ago don't prove the supernatural if there is no visible outside evidence of the supernatural. If Dr. Bahnsen chooses and wants to meet me somewhere in the California coast and demonstrate to me that he can walk on water, I submit and I pledge to all of you I will be duly impressed. Also, if Dr. Bahnsen will come with me to the Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles and have just a few pieces of fish and feed hundreds of people, and I see those fish multiplying in his hand out of nowhere to feed the multitudes of homeless in downtown Los Angeles, then I would be duly impressed. So if these extraordinary events can in fact occur, then they must visibly occur outside the boundaries of a book that does no more than claim about them. Because you see, that reduces the Bible to the same kind of literature as the UFO abductees who claim that they have been taken aboard UFOs and that their bodies and minds have been modified. In order for the God of Christianity, based on the Bible, to be nothing more than the ancient version of Elvis Presley sightings, we need verifiability that such types of violations of the laws of nature can and do occur. Or better yet, we need verification that they were not laws of nature, but that they were part of nature, and that we have in other human beings the same capacity for duplication. So if other people can resurrect from the dead, if other people can, by the energies within their bodies, suspend the laws of gravity, if other persons can materialize more out of little, then if miracles can be replicated today, it would help the evidentiary foundation of the supernatural claim. I have a friend who is a born-again Christian, and I told him that the claim in South India at Benares is that Sai Baba, an Indian guru, is capable of making ash appear out of nowhere. And there are pictures of him holding an urn upside down, taking out gallons and gallons of ash and materializing pieces of candy for the little children out of nowhere. And this born-again Christian friend said to me that unless it is trickery, it is of the devil. Why do the Christians say that if supernatural power is manifested by anybody other than their guy, it is of the devil? Why can't a believer in Satya Sai Baba say that if Jesus did it, Jesus is the devil? Why is it justified for believing Christians to say that supernaturalism, when manifested by other people, is satanic, but it's not okay for other types of spiritual seekers to say supernaturalism as manifested in Christianity is satanic? Where is the proof either way? Where is the proof that the miracles of Jesus of Nazareth occurred? And if they did occur, where is the proof that they are the only ones that ever happened? 100 Tibetan monks will testify that their leader, when he died, bodily dematerialized and disappeared in a golden light. Why is that any less verifiable? Why is that any less believable than the claim of Jesus of Nazareth? And if they're equally believable, why should not that revered Tibetan Lama be considered the equal of Jesus of Nazareth in terms of spirituality? Why this childish claim that only our guy is the man and everybody else's guy is not the man? Where is the evidentiary justification to back up the supernatural claim that your supernatural being can beat up anybody else's supernatural being on the block? That verifiability, that veridical evidence has not been adduced by any Christian thinker whatsoever at any time. And so I would recommend, if you have to believe in a God, don't believe in one that's going to send you to hell forever just because you don't buy the right theory. Believe in a God that loves everybody. And if you can't believe in a God, then let's really concentrate on loving each other, because I suspect it's all we've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tabash. Dr. Bahnsen, would you please give us your 10-minute closing statement?
Well, what lessons have we learned tonight? I think this much is plain from Mr. Tabash's rhetoric about, burning in barbecue pits and things of that nature, and challenging God and claiming things about mythology, that having a sharp tongue is not a sure indicator of possessing an equally sharp mind philosophically or using cogent reasoning. Great emphasis has been placed in my opponent's speaking tonight upon the idea of visible verification. Well, in the book of 2 Peter, chapter 1, the Apostle Peter makes this claim: "For we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty." Now, just reading the verse doesn't prove that to be true, but you need to be aware that the nature of the system he's arguing against says God has provided visible verification. And so when he keeps saying we've got to have it, we have to have it, the point is it's been given. And according to Peter, he wrote this at a time when people could check out the claims, after all. Hostile witnesses could easily have disproven it if they wanted to. He said it has come into history. We have the empirical verification. Now, a much stronger claim, you see, and this is the one that Mr. Tabash really relies on, is that even apart from claims like this in a dusty old book with, inauthentic authorship and all these kind of pathetic, unproven, slanders that he gives against the book, he'd say, well, you can make that claim, but it's just implausible. Over and over again, we've heard about the plausibility or the implausibility of this, that it's more plausible about flying saucers than about miracles and resurrections, whatever it may be. But remember that the way in which you, and I'm talking to all of us, whether we happen to agree with me or with him, all of us just have to understand this is a matter of intellectual integrity to note. What you think is plausible is a reflection of your basic conception of reality and how you know what you know and how you should live your life. Plausibility is rated by your worldview. It doesn't bother me in the slightest that he finds the miracle claims of Christianity implausible. I don't expect a person who doesn't share my worldview to think they're plausible. But of course, I find the things he's saying to be implausible. Now, should we just stand here and call each other names and talk about barbecue pits and magnanimity and all that? Or should we get down to the philosophical tough job of arguing about these worldviews and which comport with rationality and morality and so forth? And this is what Mr. Tabash has not done tonight. The bulk of Mr. Tabash's argumentation has simply been philosophically irrelevant. He's engaged in the, I think, childish assumption that if he doesn't like something, then it doesn't exist. He has the right to superimpose his values. And since he doesn't like the God revealed in the Bible, the God of the Bible doesn't exist. Well, his likes are irrelevant to what does and does not exist, just as mine are. But he engaged in that form of reasoning, and it ought to be exposed as such. He says the God idea is preposterous. Well, of course, what he's saying here is not proof, it's just personal pontification. What you think is preposterous is a function of your underlying presuppositions. Mr. Tabash has said that at one point, he said, I can't explain every natural phenomenon, but I don't need to. Well, you've missed my point. I argued that you can't explain any natural phenomenon. And so every time you say, I want natural proof, I want empirical verification, my point is your worldview can't account for anything in the world, miraculous or not miraculous. He says when we come to the Bible, we should not suspend normal analytical procedures. I agree with him. No one has asked him to do that. My whole point is that all of our normal analytical procedures presuppose the God that is revealed in the Bible to make sense out of the inductive principle, moral absolutes, human dignity, and all the rest. Just what has been missing in what Mr. Tabash said tonight? You go back and if you get the tape, listen to it. He did not offer or even attempt to offer one constructive proof for his own thesis or conclusion. He spent his time simply trying to say he didn't like what I was saying, he found this preposterous, implausible, barbecue pits and all the rest. But did he bother to prove what he came here to debate tonight? No. Now, I may not have persuaded you, and I may not have proved what I think that I have proved, but at least I have come here and offered you a form of proof. It's called transcendental proof, proving something from the impossibility of the contrary. I've looked at his presuppositions and shown that they violate the conditions of rationality and shown that the Christian theistic view does not. He could not offer a rational warrant for the uniformity of nature or the inductive principle, and so he has left all scientific inference, all of our daily experience, our learning, memory, our study of the past, and even our use of language unintelligible. His worldview doesn't make intelligible what he's been trying to do tonight in reasoning and arguing. In fact, he's even engaged in the just egregious self-contradiction in his theory of knowledge, that we only know things on the basis of empirical experience, and then he's made all sorts of claims that have nothing to do with empirical experience, including the claim that we only know things based on empirical experience. He couldn't defend his ready appeal to moral absolutes. He couldn't show why he wasn't being arbitrary when he condemns one thing and condones another thing. My opponent never explained how atheism allows that humans have more dignity than snails or dogs, how love is anything more than some kind of, I guess what, indigestion that you feel, how life could arise from non-life. He had no answer that accounts for laws and concepts and rationality. He simply couldn't cogently answer the challenges that were given to him. On the other hand, the proof of God's existence is that without him you cannot prove anything at all, whether in science or ethics or just ordinary human experience. You can't make sense of or offer rational evidence for the inescapable assumption of uniformity, which atheism violates. That assumption is foundational to all thinking and all reasoning. You can't coherently assert any kind of moral evaluation or judgment if people are nothing more but molecules in motion. And so we found tonight that atheists are uncomfortable with the need for being tough-minded in philosophy. I know that they can be ridiculing us, and I'm certainly sorry when any kind of debate, comes down to that, even if I have engaged in that. But tough-minded philosophical thinking has just not been found in the case that he's tried to offer. Atheists thoughtlessly profess, and they are emotionally committed to an underlying worldview that happens to render the reasoning, science, and ethics they want to do unintelligible. If atheists were consistent with their uncritical, fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality, they aren't, of course, but if they were consistent, they couldn't make sense of what we all take for granted, from toothpaste to the planets. So contrary to their professed theoretical presuppositions and actual practice in the real world, in debates before real university audiences, atheists pretend that there's uniformity in nature, that they can appeal to the absolutes of ethics. But on atheist presuppositions, you can't intelligently account for reasoning or discourse or debate at all. What I'm saying here simply is that Mr. Tabash is a living contradiction. He cannot account for his fundamental convictions about the world, about life, and about how we know what we know. Indeed, it's evident that he's not even thought seriously and critically about such matters, because he just wanders into self-contradiction when he starts talking about these basic matters. He's indulged in reasoning which is really, and I don't mean this personally, pathetic for its arbitrariness and its contradictory character, for its unproven, emotion-driven pronouncements. Basically, a line of thinking which violates the fundamental criteria of rationality. The atheist is satisfied to ignore the need for intellectual justification and explanation, the need to gain consistency within his total beliefs, and the need to demonstrate systematic cogency in his overall perspective on the world, man, and values. And in this light, atheism, for all its proud boast of scholarly adequacy, is a kind of intellectual adolescence which refuses to think hard, face the facts, and be tough-minded. Atheists live when all is said and done, and you push them by blind and contradictory faith about how we know what we know and what the nature of reality is. Atheism is arbitrary and irrational, all the while dressing up in the costume of rationality. Philosophically speaking, it's really much closer to superstition, undisciplined reflection and wishful thinking than to science. No wonder that Scripture says that it's the fool who says in his heart there is no God. Paul says, professing themselves to be wise, those who are unbelievers, they became fools. That is not name-calling. That's a description of what happens to your reasoning when you will not admit the obvious. Mr. Tabash is in a lot of company, but the fact that there are a lot of people who do that sort of thing doesn't make his thinking any less superstitious or arbitrary. He is simply taking his intellectual autonomy for granted.
Thank you very much.